July 10th, 1998, Jacksonville, Florida. The kind of summer day where the humidity wraps around you like a wet blanket, where the air conditioning in University Medical Center offers blessed relief from the sweltering heat outside. Inside the maternity ward, 16-year-old Kamiyah Mobley cradled her newborn daughter Kamiyah, just 8 hours old. The baby's skin was still that delicate newborn softness, her tiny fingers curled into fists. Kamiyah was exhausted, but radiating that fierce, protective love that only a new mother knows. She had no idea that in less than 3 hours, her world would shatter in a way that would defy comprehension for the next 18 years. This is the story of Kamiyah Mobley, but it's also the story of Alexis Manigo. 2 names, 2 lives, 1 person, and a crime so audacious, so perfectly executed that it would haunt a family and captivate a nation for nearly 2 decades. This isn't just a story about a kidnapping. It's a story about identity, about the lies we tell ourselves and the truths we can't escape, about a mother's love that never dies, and another mother's love that was built on the most devastating lie imaginable. Welcome to a cold case that remained warm in the hearts of everyone who knew about it, until the day the truth finally, impossibly came to light. To understand this story, you need to understand Kamiyah Mobley. In the summer of 1998, she was just 16 years old, a teenager herself, navigating the complicated waters of young motherhood in Jacksonville's North Side neighborhood. Her relationship with Kamiyah's father, Craig Eichen, was tumultuous, marked by the kind of passionate ups and downs that characterize many young relationships. But despite the challenges, despite her age, Kamiyah was determined to be a good mother. The pregnancy had been difficult. Kamiyah had experienced complications that worried her doctors, making every day of that pregnancy precious and precarious. When Kamiyah finally arrived on July 10th at 2:45 a.m., weighing 6 pounds and 9 ounces, it felt like a miracle. The baby had a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival with impressive volume. Kamiyah counted her fingers, her toes, all perfect, all there. Craig was there too, along with Kamiyah's mother, Velma Aiken. The small hospital room was filled with that specific joy that comes with new life, that sense of infinite possibility. They took turns holding Kamiyah, marveling at her, making plans for her future. What college would she attend? What would she become? In those early morning hours, anything seemed possible. But Jacksonville in 1998 was a city of contrasts. The sprawling metropolitan area was experiencing growing pains, pockets of prosperity alongside areas struggling with poverty and crime. University Medical Center, located in the urban core, served a diverse population. The maternity ward was busy, understaffed like so many hospitals in the late 90s, with nurses and staff rushing between rooms, dealing with the constant flow of new mothers and crying infants. Security protocols existed, but they were far from the sophisticated systems we see in hospitals today. Babies wore small ID bracelets, but they weren't the electronic tracking devices now standard in maternity wards. Visitors weren't extensively screened. The general atmosphere was more trusting, more open. After all, who would steal a baby from a hospital? That question would soon be answered in the most horrifying way imaginable. By late morning on July 10th, Kamiyah was settling into the routine of new motherhood. She'd attempted to breastfeed, had changed diapers under the watchful eye of a nurse, had made phone calls to family members eager for updates. Kamiyah slept in her arms, that deep, peaceful sleep of newborns who have no idea how complicated the world can be. Then, at approximately 10:30 a.m., a woman entered Kamiyah's room. She was African American, wearing scrubs patterned with cheerful cartoon characters, the kind that pediatric nurses often wore to seem friendly and approachable. She carried a clipboard and wore an air of professional confidence. She was pleasant, chatty even, complimenting Shannara on her beautiful baby, asking how she was feeling, discussing the various tests that newborns routinely undergo. "I need to take her to get her temperature checked and run a few quick tests," the woman said, her voice warm and reassuring. "It'll just be a few minutes. You rest, honey. You've been through a lot." Shannara, exhausted from labor and delivery, saw no reason to question this. The woman looked official. She acted official. This was a hospital, a place of healing and care. Why would she doubt? She handed over Kamiyah. The woman in scrubs smiled, cradled the baby with practiced ease, and walked out of the room. She never came back. The first hour passed. Shannara dozed off, her body demanding rest after the ordeal of childbirth. When she woke, she expected to see Kamiyah in the bassinet beside her bed. The bassinet was empty. Another hour passed. Shannara pressed the call button, asking a nurse where her baby was. The nurse looked confused. There were no tests scheduled that would take this long. She promised to check. By the time hospital staff realized what had happened, nearly 3 hours had passed since the woman in scrubs had walked out with Kamiyah. 3 hours is an eternity when you're trying to find a kidnapper. It's enough time to drive to another state. It's enough time to disappear completely. The hospital erupted into chaos. Code Pink, infant abduction, blared through the PA system. Doors were locked, staff questioned, security footage reviewed. But the technology of 1998 was primitive compared to today's standards. The surveillance cameras were grainy, limited in number, and focused primarily on entrances and exits. They captured a woman in scrubs walking purposefully through a hallway, a bundle in her arms, but her face was partially obscured. The footage was unclear, frustratingly inadequate. For Kamiyah Mobley, the realization came in waves, each one more devastating than the last. First, disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Then panic, pure visceral terror. Then rage, at the hospital, at the security, at the woman who had smiled so kindly while committing the most heinous act imaginable. And finally, underneath it all, a grief so profound it felt like drowning. Craig Aiken arrived at the hospital to find his girlfriend hysterical, surrounded by police officers and hospital administrators. The scene was surreal, nightmarish. 8 hours ago, they'd been parents. Now they were victims. Their daughter, barely old enough to have opened her eyes to the world, was gone. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office immediately launched a massive investigation. FBI agents were called in. Infant abduction is a federal crime. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was notified. Amber Alerts didn't exist yet in 1998, but every law enforcement agency in Florida and surrounding states received bulletins with Kamiyah's description and information about the suspected kidnapper. Investigators worked around the clock, interviewing every staff member who had been on duty that day, reviewing visitor logs, tracking down anyone who had been in the maternity ward. They created composite sketches based on descriptions from Shannara and a few nurses who had seen the woman in scrubs. She was described as African American, in her 30s or 40s, heavy-set, with a warm demeanor and a believable air of authority. The profile of the suspect told a troubling story. According to FBI behavioral analysts, women who kidnap newborns typically fit a specific pattern. They're often unable to have children themselves or have recently lost a pregnancy. They desperately want to be mothers, sometimes to satisfy a partner or to fill an emotional void. They plan their abductions carefully, sometimes stalking hospitals for days or weeks, learning routines, blending in. They're not typically violent. Their goal isn't to harm the baby but to raise it as their own. This psychological profile was both reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring because it meant Kamiyah was likely alive and being cared for. Terrifying because it meant the kidnapper would be highly motivated to stay hidden, to protect her secret at all costs. Tips poured in from across the country. Every woman with a newborn who couldn't immediately produce hospital records was investigated. Every suspicious circumstance was followed up on. But weeks turned into months, and Kamiyah Mobley remained missing. For Shannara and Craig, life became divided into before and after. Before July 10, 1998, they were typical teenagers navigating the challenges of unexpected parenthood. After that date, they were the parents of a missing child, their faces on news broadcasts, their names in newspapers, their grief on public display. The strain destroyed their relationship. They blamed each other, blamed themselves, cycled through anger and despair. Craig struggled with guilt. Why hadn't he been in the room when the woman came? Could he have stopped it? Shannara was haunted by the moment she handed Kamiyah over, replaying it endlessly in her mind. What if she had questioned the nurse? What if she had insisted on going with them? But the cruelest part of this nightmare wasn't just the not knowing. It was the hoping. Every phone call could be the one. Every news story about a found child could be Kamiyah. Hope became a form of torture, keeping them suspended in a limbo where they couldn't properly grieve but couldn't move forward either. And as the investigation began to go cold, as the months stretched into years, a terrible reality set in. Kamiyah Mobley might never be found. Part 3. The Woman in Scrubs, 15 o'clock to 22 o'clock. While Jacksonville mourned and searched, in a small town in South Carolina, a different story was unfolding. A woman named Gloria Williams had a new baby. According to Gloria, she'd given birth in a hospital in Atlanta during a difficult labor, and the hospital had lost most of her paperwork, a frustrating administrative error. But these things happen, especially in the pre-digital age of the late 90s. Gloria Williams lived in Walterboro, South Carolina, a quiet town about 175 miles north of Jacksonville. With a population of around 5,000, Walterboro was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. It was a town of churches and Friday night football, of Spanish moss hanging from old oak trees and the humid embrace of low-country summer. Gloria was in her early 40s, working various jobs to make ends meet. She'd had several children from previous relationships, but her life had been marked by instability and disappointment. Those who knew her described her as somewhat erratic, someone who told elaborate stories that didn't always add up. But she wasn't violent or cruel. If anything, neighbors would later say, she seemed like someone desperately trying to create the family she'd always wanted. The baby she brought home in July 1998 was named Alexis Manigo. She was a beautiful infant with expressive eyes and that same head of dark hair that Kamiyah had been born with. Gloria doted on her, posting about her proudly, bringing her to family gatherings, treating her like the precious gift she claimed she was. And Alexis grew up believing she was exactly who Gloria said she was, her daughter. The audacity of Gloria Williams' crime cannot be overstated. She didn't just kidnap a baby and hide away. She raised that baby in plain sight in a small town, with family and friends and community connections. She obtained a fraudulent birth certificate, a shockingly easy thing to do in the late 90s before databases were interconnected and security measures were robust. She enrolled Alexis in school, took her to doctor's appointments, celebrated birthdays and holidays. How did she pull this off? Partly through the vulnerabilities in the system. In 1998, different states didn't communicate well about vital records. Birth certificates could be obtained with minimal documentation. Social security numbers could be applied for without extensive verification. The digital trails we take for granted today simply didn't exist. But it was also Gloria's personality that made it work. She was a storyteller, someone who could spin a convincing narrative. When questions arose about hospital records or paperwork, she had explanations, lost documents, administrative errors, bureaucratic incompetence, Most people accepted these explanations because why would they suspect otherwise? Who kidnaps a baby and raises them in the same region where the kidnapping occurred? As Alexis grew, she became Gloria's whole world. Gloria wasn't wealthy. They lived modestly, sometimes struggling financially. But she provided for Alexis, gave her love and attention, created a home. To the outside world, and more importantly, to Alexis herself. They were simply a single mother and her daughter, navigating life's challenges together. But underneath this carefully constructed normalcy, cracks were beginning to show. Alexis didn't look much like Gloria, and as she got older, people noticed. There were questions about her father, about family history, about medical records that never seemed quite right. Alexis herself began to sense inconsistencies. There were no baby pictures. Gloria's stories about Alexis's birth changed subtly over the years. Family members seemed uncertain about details that should have been clear. By the time Alexis was a teenager, she developed a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. She couldn't articulate it exactly, couldn't point to any one thing that proved her suspicions. It was more like a collection of small discrepancies that added up to a troubling picture. She began asking Gloria more pointed questions. Where were her hospital records? Why couldn't she get a passport? Gloria's explanations became more elaborate, more defensive. The tension in their relationship grew. What Alexis didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that hundreds of miles away in Jacksonville, Florida, her biological mother had never stopped looking for her. That every July 10th, Kamiyah Mobley held a vigil for the daughter who would have been turning another year older. That law enforcement still considered the case open, still followed up on tips, still hoped for a break that would bring Kamiyah home. The two lives, Kamiyah Mobley and Alexis Manigo, existed in parallel universes, connected by a truth that neither could see. But those parallel lines were about to intersect in the most unexpected way. Before we continue with this remarkable story, I want to take a moment to ask you something. If you're finding this case as compelling as I am, please consider subscribing to this channel and hitting that notification bell. Cold cases like Kamiyah's need to be told, need to be remembered, and your support helps ensure these stories reach the people who need to hear them. Whether you're a longtime true crime enthusiast or new to these deep dives, your engagement keeps these important stories alive. Also remember to tell us where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Now, let's continue. While Alexis was growing up in South Carolina, the investigation into Kamiyah Mobley's disappearance continued in Jacksonville, though it had officially become a cold case by the early 2000s. Detective Steve Sechrist of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office had taken over the case, joining a long line of investigators who had worked it over the years. Steve was a meticulous detective, the kind who couldn't let go of unsolved cases, who kept files at home and thought about them during his off hours. For Kamiyah Mobley, life had moved forward in the painful way it does for parents of missing children. She'd had other children, 3 more kids who would grow up knowing they had a sister they'd never met. She'd aged in the way that trauma ages people, carrying a burden that never lightened. Every July 10th, she held a birthday celebration for Kamiyah, marking another year gone by, another year of not knowing. Craig Aiken had similarly moved on with his life, while never really moving on at all. He'd had other relationships, other children, but Kamiyah was always there, a presence in his life even through her absence. He kept her newborn photo in his wallet, carried it with him everywhere. Sometimes people would ask about it, and he'd have to explain. That's my daughter, the one who was taken. The Jacksonville community hadn't forgotten either. Local news stations would run anniversary stories every year, refreshing people's memories, showing age-progressed photos of what Kamiyah might look like now. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children maintained her case file, periodically updating the age progression images as she would have grown from infant to toddler to child to teenager. These age progression photos were created by forensic artists using sophisticated software that predicted how Kamiyah's features would change as she matured. They took into account her parents' features, typical growth patterns, and statistical modeling. The images showed a beautiful young girl, then a striking teenager. They were distributed widely, posted on missing children websites, shared on early social media platforms as those emerged in the 2000s. What no one realized was that these age progression images looked remarkably like Alexis Manigo. By 2016, as Alexis approached her 18th birthday, the tensions between her and Gloria had reached a breaking point. Alexis had graduated high school and was trying to figure out her next steps. She wanted to apply for college, get a driver's license, establish her adult identity. But every official document she needed seemed to hit a wall. The birth certificate Gloria had didn't match up with hospital records that didn't exist. The social security number was problematic. The bureaucratic runaround was frustrating and confusing. Alexis had grown into a beautiful young woman with a strong sense of self. She was popular, had close friends, was active in her church community. She loved Gloria, considered her to be her mother in every way that mattered. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental about her identity was wrong. She began researching online, looking into adoption records, trying to understand why her paperwork was such a mess. And then, one day, she stumbled across something that made her blood run cold. A friend, during a casual conversation about weird news stories, mentioned cases of babies stolen from hospitals. "Imagine finding out you were kidnapped as a baby," the friend said, laughing at the absurdity of it. But Alexis didn't laugh. Instead, she went home and began searching for stories about hospital abductions. That's when she found the case of Kamiyah Mobley, a baby stolen from Jacksonville, Florida, in July 1998, the same month and year Alexis was supposedly born, from a hospital just a few hours' drive from where Gloria lived. And when Alexis looked at the age progression photos, she saw her own face staring back at her. The realization came slowly, then all at once. Every discrepancy, every inconsistency, every strange explanation suddenly made horrifying sense. She thought about confronting Gloria directly, but something held her back. Fear, perhaps. Or maybe a desperate hope that she was wrong, that this was all a terrible coincidence. Instead, in August 2016, Alexis did something extraordinary. She contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children through their anonymous tip line. She didn't immediately claim to be Kamiyah Mobley. She simply asked questions. What would someone do if they suspected they might have been kidnapped as a baby? How would they find out for sure? What kind of testing was available? The intake specialist on the other end of the line recognized immediately that this wasn't a routine call. The details Alexis provided, her birth date, the location, the inconsistencies in her documentation, aligned perfectly with the Kamiyah Mobley case. The specialist stayed calm, professional, but her heart was racing. Could this be the break they'd been waiting for? The tip was immediately forwarded to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, to Detective Steve Sechrist, the man who had spent years hoping for exactly this kind of lead. He read the report 3 times, checking every detail against what he knew about the case. The dates matched, the location made sense, the physical description was consistent with the age progression photos. But he'd been down this road before. Over the years, there had been dozens of tips, young women who thought they might be Kamiyah Mobley. Some were searching for their own identities, some were genuinely confused, and a few were frauds looking for attention. Every tip had to be followed up on, and everyone had ended in disappointment. This one, though, felt different. The level of detail was right. The circumstances aligned too perfectly, And there was something in the way the tip had been submitted, the thoughtfulness of it, the specific questions asked that suggested this was real. Steve Sechrist picked up the phone to call the FBI. After 18 years, Kamiyah Mobley might finally be coming home. The next few months unfolded with a delicate balance of urgency and caution. Law enforcement couldn't simply swoop in and declare that Alexis Manigo was Kamiyah Mobley. They needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would hold up in court, and, more importantly, that would help Alexis Kamiyah understand and accept her true identity. DNA testing was the answer, but getting it required careful maneuvering. Alexis had agreed to provide a sample, but she was terrified. If the test came back positive, her entire life, everything she'd known about herself, everyone she'd loved, every memory she'd cherished, would be revealed as a lie. If it came back negative, she'd have to live with having suspected the woman who raised her of an unthinkable crime. In December 2016, Alexis provided a DNA sample at a facility in South Carolina. Kamiyah Mobley and Craig Aiken also provided samples, their hands shaking as they swabbed their cheeks, hope and dread warring in their hearts. They'd been through this before with other potential matches, and the disappointment had been crushing. They didn't dare believe this time would be different. The samples were sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, where forensic specialists conducted nuclear DNA analysis. This type of testing examines 20 specific genetic markers and can determine with near certainty whether individuals are biologically related. In cases of parent-child relationships, the accuracy is essentially 100%. The results took 3 weeks to process, 3 weeks where everyone involved existed in a state of suspended animation, afraid to hope, unable not to. On January 13, 2017, Detective Steve Sechrist received the lab report. He read the conclusion section, read it again, then had to step away from his desk for a moment to compose himself. After 18 years, 7 months, and 3 days, the cold case was solved. Alexis Kelly Manigo was Kamiyah Teresia Tasha Mobley. The genetic markers were a perfect match. There was no doubt, no ambiguity. The baby, who had been taken from University Medical Center in Jacksonville on July 10, 1998, had been found alive and well in South Carolina, just a few hours from where she'd been born. Now came the most delicate part of the entire operation: the arrest of Gloria Williams and the revelation to Alexis/Kamiyah about her true identity. Law enforcement had to coordinate with prosecutors, victim advocates, and mental health professionals. This wasn't just a criminal case. It was a young woman's entire sense of self being shattered and rebuilt simultaneously. On January 13, 2017, the same day the DNA results were confirmed, a team of law enforcement officers, FBI agents, and victim advocates converge on Walterboro, South Carolina. They had to move quickly once the DNA was confirmed. There was a risk that Gloria might flee if she suspected the truth had been discovered. Alexis was brought to the sheriff's office under the pretext of needing to answer some follow-up questions about her tip. She came willingly, nervously, still not entirely sure whether she wanted her suspicions confirmed or debunked. In a quiet interview room, Detective Sechrist sat across from her. With him was a victim advocate named Sarah Chen, a woman trained in dealing with the specific trauma of recovered victims. They explained the DNA results as gently as possible, but there's no easy way to tell someone that their entire life has been a lie. Alexis's reaction was complex, layered. Part of her had known, had suspected, but hearing it confirmed was still devastating. She cried, not just tears of grief, but of rage, confusion, relief, and a dozen other emotions that had no name. She asked questions. Where were her real parents? Did they look for her? Did they want her? The answers only complicated things further. Yes, they'd never stopped looking. Yes, they wanted to see her. Yes, they'd always loved her, had held vigils for her, had kept her memory alive. But for Alexis, Shannara and Craig were strangers. The mother she knew, the mother she loved despite everything, was Gloria Williams, the woman who had stolen her. While Alexis was being told the truth about her identity, Gloria Williams was being arrested at her home in Walterboro. She was charged with kidnapping and interference with custody, federal charges that carried significant prison time. When officers knocked on her door with an arrest warrant, Gloria's face crumbled. She didn't deny what she'd done. In fact, in some terrible way, she seemed almost relieved that the secret was finally out. Later, Gloria would tell investigators about the day she took Kamiyah from the hospital. She'd been pregnant herself, she claimed, but had suffered a miscarriage. She was devastated, desperate. Her relationship was falling apart, and she believed that having a baby would fix it. She'd gone to University Medical Center intending to take a baby, any baby. When she saw Shannara, young and alone with a newborn, Gloria saw her opportunity. She bought scrubs from a medical supply store, walked into the hospital with confidence, and simply took the baby. It was shockingly easy. She drove immediately to South Carolina, created a false birth certificate using documents she'd forged, and started her new life as Alexis's mother. "I know it was wrong," Gloria told investigators through tears. "But I loved her. I raised her. I was her mother in every way that mattered. But the law doesn't recognize love built on kidnapping." And Alexis, sitting in that interview room, had to grapple with the reality that the woman who had loved her, nurtured her, and raised her had also committed a crime so heinous it had destroyed another family. The question facing Alexis was impossible. How do you reconcile loving someone who stole you? The reunion between Kamiyah and her biological parents was arranged for January 14, 2017, one day after Gloria's arrest. It took place in a neutral location, a conference room at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, with counselors present to help navigate what would undoubtedly be an emotionally charged meeting. Kamiyah Mobley walked into that room carrying 18 years of grief, hope, and desperate love. She'd imagined this moment thousands of times, had played it out in her mind in countless variations. Would Kamiyah run to her? Would she remember her somehow, in some cellular way? Would she be angry that Shannara had let her be taken? Craig Aiken was equally nervous. He'd missed everything: first steps, first words, first days of school, first heartbreak. He'd missed watching his daughter grow up. And now here she was, a fully formed adult woman who looked like him but didn't know him at all. And Alexis, because that's still who she felt like, walked in feeling like she was being split in two. Intellectually, she understood that these were her biological parents, that they had suffered terribly, that they deserved to know her. But emotionally, she was in turmoil. She missed Gloria, the only mother she'd ever known, even as she grappled with the enormity of what Gloria had done. The meeting was tearful, awkward, and profound. Shannara couldn't stop staring at Kamiyah's face, seeing her baby's features in this grown woman. She reached out to touch her daughter's hand, and when Kamiyah didn't pull away, Shannara broke down completely. "I never stopped looking for you," Shannara said through sobs. "Not one day. You were always with me, always in my heart." Kamiyah, she was trying to think of herself as Kamiyah now, cried too. "I don't remember you," she said softly. "I wish I did, but I don't remember anything." And how could she? She'd been 8 hours old when she was taken. She had no conscious memories of the hospital, of those first hours with her biological parents. Her first memories were of Gloria, of the home in South Carolina, of a life that was now revealed to be built on a crime. The family dynamics became even more complex when Kamiyah learned she had siblings, 3 younger brothers and sisters who had grown up knowing they had a sister who was taken. They were eager to meet her, to welcome her into the family. But for Kamiyah, it felt overwhelming. She had half-siblings on Gloria's side too, people she'd grown up with, who were now tainted by association with the crime. The media descended on the story with voracious intensity. "Baby Kamiyah, found alive after 18 years," the headline screamed. News crews camped outside Shanara's home, outside the courthouse where Gloria was being held, outside the apartment where Kamiyah was staying. The story had everything: a dramatic kidnapping, a years-long mystery, an unlikely resolution. It was national news, then international news. But lost in the sensationalism was the reality of what Kamiyah was experiencing. She was grieving the loss of her identity while trying to build a new one. She loved Gloria, but had to come to terms with the fact that Gloria's love for her had been stolen from someone else. She wanted to build a relationship with Shanara and Craig, but felt disloyal to Gloria for doing so. Trauma specialists who work with recovered victims of long-term abduction describe this as a unique form of psychological injury. Kamiyah hadn't been physically abused. She'd been loved, cared for, given a stable home. But she'd also been living a lie, and discovering that lie at age 18, when your identity is already in flux, was profoundly destabilizing. She experienced symptoms of PTSD, nightmares, anxiety, difficulty trusting people. She questioned everything about herself. If her name wasn't real, if her birthday wasn't real, if her mother wasn't real, then what was? She'd look in the mirror and not recognize herself, not because her appearance had changed, but because she didn't know who was looking back. Shanara wanted desperately to make up for lost time, to fill the 18 years of absence with overwhelming love. But Kamiyah needed space, needed time to process. The pressure of suddenly having a family with expectations and history and love was almost as suffocating as the revelation about Gloria. The most heartbreaking aspect of the entire situation was Kamiyah's conflicted feelings about Gloria. In interviews, she said things that confused people who couldn't understand how she could still love the woman who kidnapped her. But from Kamiyah's perspective, Gloria was her mother. Gloria had raised her, loved her, been there for every important moment. The crime Gloria committed was against Shanara, against the Mobley family. But Gloria had never hurt Kamiyah herself. This is the psychological phenomenon known as trauma bonding, but it was more complex than that. Kamiyah's love for Gloria wasn't just a result of a manipulation or Stockholm syndrome. It was genuine love, earned over 18 years of daily life together. The tragedy was that this love existed because of a crime, not in spite of it. I know this story is heavy, and it raises questions that don't have easy answers. If you're struggling with your own feelings about this case, about identity, family, justice, know that you're not alone. The comments section below is a community where we can discuss these complex issues thoughtfully. And if this story has affected you, please consider sharing it with others who might benefit from hearing Kamiyah's remarkable journey. Understanding these cases helps us better support survivors and prevents future tragedies. Gloria Williams' trial became a focal point for broader debates about kidnapping, maternal instinct, and the nature of family bonds. The prosecution was straightforward. Gloria had committed a premeditated kidnapping, forged documents, and lived a lie for 18 years. She deprived Kamiyah of her true identity and caused immeasurable suffering to the Mobley family. But Gloria's defense team argued for leniency, pointing out that she'd given Kamiyah a loving home, that she'd never physically harmed her, and that she was motivated by a desperate desire to be a mother rather than by malice. They presented evidence of Gloria's troubled background, her history of miscarriages, her mental health struggles. The central question before the court was, how do you punish someone for a crime that resulted in what appeared to be, from the victim's perspective, a loving upbringing. Kamiyah's testimony at sentencing was the most dramatic moment of the proceedings. She stood before the court, facing Gloria for the first time since the arrest. The courtroom was silent as she spoke. "What you did was wrong," Kamiyah said, her voice shaking but clear. "You took me from my mother, and that's something I can never forgive. You stole 18 years from her, from my father, from me. But you also raised me. You loved me. You were my mother in every way that mattered to me." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to reconcile those two things. I don't know if I ever will, but I want you to know that I still love you, even though I know I shouldn't." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Kamiyah Mobley, sitting in the gallery, wept openly. She'd gained a daughter but lost 18 years. Gloria had given Kamiyah a childhood, but stolen someone else's baby to do it. There was no version of this story where everyone won. In May 2018, Gloria Williams was sentenced to 18 years in prison, 1 year for each year she'd kept Kamiyah from her biological family. The sentence was considered lenient by some, harsh by others. The judge acknowledged the complexity of the case, noting that while Gloria's crime was serious, her care for Kamiyah had been genuine. For Kamiyah, the sentencing brought no closure, only a different kind of grief. She was losing Gloria again, this time to prison. The visits would be limited, the relationship forever changed by bars and regulations. Meanwhile, her relationship with Shanera and Craig continued to develop slowly. She started calling Shanera Mom sometimes, though it felt strange on her tongue. She got to know her siblings, finding unexpected joy in their company. She discovered family resemblances. She had her father's laugh, her mother's stubbornness. But building a relationship with one's biological family as an adult is fundamentally different from growing up with them. There's no shared history, no accumulated memories of holidays and everyday moments. They were starting from scratch, trying to build in months what should have taken a lifetime. Kamiyah also struggled with practical identity issues. She had to obtain new identification documents, had to decide whether to legally change her name back to Kamiyah Mobley or keep Alexis Manigo. She chose to go by both, using Kamiyah legally, but introducing herself as Alexis to people who'd known her before. It was a compromise that satisfied no one fully, but felt manageable to her. The financial implications were also significant. The Mobley family had limited resources, and suddenly, they were helping support Kamiyah as she tried to figure out her next steps. Kamiyah herself was dealing with the psychological aftermath of trauma, making it difficult to maintain steady employment or pursue education consistently. Various advocacy groups and true crime media outlets offered financial assistance, but it came with strings, expectations that Kamiyah would tell her story publicly, that she'd participate in documentaries or write a book. Every offer felt like another way her trauma was being commodified, her pain turned into entertainment. Today, Kamiyah Mobley is in her mid-20s, still navigating the complex reality of her identity. She's a mother herself now, which has added another layer to her understanding of what was taken from Shanera and what Gloria stole to have. Her relationship with Shanera has deepened over the years, though it remains complicated. They text regularly, see each other when possible, share photos and updates about their lives. Shanera has been there for major milestones, has met her grandchildren, has provided support during difficult times. But the easy intimacy that comes from a lifetime together still eludes them. Kamiyah maintains that she loves Gloria, visits her in prison, and talks to her on the phone. This continues to confuse and sometimes anger people who believe Kamiyah should reject Gloria completely. But trauma survivors deserve the right to process their experiences on their own terms, in their own time. The case of Kamiyah Mobley raises profound questions about identity, family, and justice that resist easy answers. What makes someone your mother, biology, or the daily work of raising a child? Can a crime committed with love be forgiven? Or does love make the betrayal even worse? How do you punish someone whose crime was, from one perspective, creating a family? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're the reality of Kamiyah's daily life, the contradictions she lives with every single day. What we can say definitively is this. The case led to improved security in hospital maternity wards across the country. Electronic tagging of newborns is now standard. Visitor protocols are more rigorous. The vulnerabilities that Gloria Williams exploited have largely been closed. We can also say that Kamiyah survived. Despite the trauma, despite the identity crisis, despite everything, she survived and is building a life that honors both her identities. She's Kamiyah Mobley, the stolen baby who came home. And she's Alexis Manigo, the young woman who grew up loved and cared for. She's both. She's neither. She's finding her own way through an impossible situation with remarkable grace. Kamiyah Mobley got her daughter back, but not in the way she dreamed about for 18 years. Craig Aiken knows his daughter now, but he missed everything that made her who she is. And Gloria Williams, sitting in prison, lives with the knowledge that her love for Alexis, genuine, powerful, real, was built on the destruction of someone else's family. There are no winners in this story, but there's survival, there's resilience, and there's the ongoing complicated work of defining yourself when everything you thought you knew turns out to be something else entirely. Kamiyah Mobley's story reminds us that identity is more fragile and more resilient than we imagine, that families can be chosen and biological and everything in between, that justice sometimes looks different from closure, and that the human capacity for love, even complicated, problematic, stolen love, is boundless and strange and ultimately what saves us. The cold case of baby Kamiyah is solved, but the story of who she is, who she's becoming, is still being written. If you enjoyed this story and look forward to the next one, please hit the subscribe button now. See you in the next one.